It started with a knock. That didn't sound right. Too heavy. Too deliberate. The kind of knock that makes your stomach twist before you even open the door. I was halfway through my coffee, a quiet Saturday morning, sunlight just beginning to touch the cheap blinds in my apartment. I remember thinking how peaceful it was until that knock. When I opened the door, my landlord, Mr. Henley, was standing there, suit to clean for a weekend, expression too polite to be genuine. Behind him, the hallway light flickered, like even the building knew something was off. "Morning, Alex," he said, folding his hands behind his back like a man about to deliver bad news he enjoys. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, still half confused. "Sure, what's going on?" He didn't step in, just leaned slightly forward, eyes sharp. "You're 6 months behind on rent." I laughed before I could stop myself. Not out of disrespect, out of shock. I think you've got the wrong apartment, Mr. Henley. I've paid every month. On time." He tilted his head, smile vanishing. "I don't make those kinds of mistakes." That's when my chest tightened. His voice carried this strange authority, like he'd already decided I was guilty. He pulled out a thin folder and flipped it open. Inside were printed rent records, but half the months were marked and paid in red ink. 6 months. Nearly 7,200. I could feel my heartbeat rising. "That's impossible. I paid you in cash every month, and you gave me receipts yourself." He didn't blink. "Then produce them." It was that simple. 4 words that turned my entire life upside down. For a second, I couldn't even speak. My mind started racing. I kept my receipts in a small brown envelope in the drawer by my desk. I'd always been careful. Always. "Fine," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'll get them." But as I turned back toward my apartment, he said, almost casually, "Take your time. But you have 3 days before I file eviction." 3 days. That's all I got after 2 years of perfect payments, quiet living, and fixing half the things in this place myself because he never sent maintenance. When I opened that drawer, the envelope was gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd misplaced it. I checked every corner, under the desk, behind the books, even in my filing box where I kept tax documents. Nothing. Gone. My chest went cold. That envelope wasn't just paper, it was my proof, my lifeline. Without it, his word became law. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smirk of his, that quiet confidence of someone who knew I had no way to fight back. I started second guessing myself. Maybe I really did lose it. Maybe I'd been careless. But no, I remembered clearly. I'd last seen that envelope a few weeks ago, after paying rent for April. I'd even double counted the receipts. The thought hit me like a chill. What if someone took it? The next morning, I went to talk to my neighbor, Jordan, a nurse who lived across the hall. She'd seen everything in this building, heard every story. When I told her what happened, her face went pale. "Wait, Mr. Henley said the same thing to the couple in for B last year. Claimed they missed for months. They moved out instead of fighting it." That made my stomach drop. "You think he's scamming tenants?" She nodded slowly. "Wouldn't surprise me. He's been losing paperwork for years." I sat there, the walls of my apartment suddenly feeling smaller, tighter. Every unpaid bill, every bad light, every ignored email. It all made sense now. Mr. Henley wasn't disorganized. He was deliberate, and now I was his next target. That night, I checked every corner of my apartment again. Nothing. But I noticed something strange. The lock on my drawer was slightly bent, like someone had forced it open. I froze. Only 2 people had keys to my place, me and Mr. Henley. The realization made my hands tremble. He hadn't just accused me, he'd broken in, stolen my proof, and set the trap. For the first time in years, I felt powerless in my own home. The next morning, I called him. I kept my voice calm. "Mr. Henley," I checked again. "My receipts are missing." He didn't even sound surprised. "That's unfortunate," he said coldly, "but without proof, the lease terms are clear. You either pay or vacate." I wanted to scream, to accuse him outright, but something inside me told me to wait. He wanted me to react to panic, to threaten, to make a mistake. Instead, I said quietly, "Understood. I'll get back to you." I hung up, sat on my couch, and stared at the wall for a long time. That's when the realization settled in. I wasn't just being cheated. I was being played. He thought I was just another tenant who'd cave under pressure, someone who'd leave quietly. But he didn't know me, because if he wanted a fight, I was going to give him one, and I wasn't going to lose. I barely slept that night. The walls of my apartment, the same ones that had once felt like safety, now felt like witnesses. Every creak sounded like a threat. Every shadow in the hallway reminded me that my home wasn't really mine anymore. When morning came, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Henley. "You have until Monday." After that, I start eviction proceedings. "You can leave quietly or deal with court." Just like that, like it was an everyday text. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the humiliation, the helplessness of knowing someone could rewrite your truth and get away with it. I decided to call him. Maybe if I stayed calm, I could reason with him. "Mr. Henley," I said as soon as he picked up, "I need you to listen to me. You know I've paid you every month." His voice was dry. "Then you'll have no problem showing receipts. I told you they're missing." "Someone must have, Alex," he interrupted, tone turning sharp. "Your excuses are not my concern. You're behind 6 months. You either pay the balance or vacate." I'm not discussing it further. "But you know I've always paid on time," he sighed. "I've been more than patient." "Don't make this ugly." Then he hung up. "Don't make this ugly." Those words stuck in my head head like splinters. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message. He was telling me, I'm in control. You can't touch me. And maybe he was right. I went through my phone records, my bank statements, nothing. Every rent payment had been in cash. No Venmo, no Zelle, no paper trail. Because he'd insisted on it, cash is easier, he used to say. Keeps the paperwork simple. Now I realized what he meant, it kept him safe. By noon, I was pacing my living room, talking to myself. There had to be another way. Someone else must have seen me pay him, a neighbor. Someone in the hallway, even the mailman. But the more I thought, the more I realized how careful Henley had always been. He'd collect rent at odd hours, usually early morning or late at night. Always quiet, always discreet. He never left witnesses. That afternoon, I went downstairs to the mailroom to check my lease agreement. Maybe there was something in the fine print, something that could buy me time. The office door was locked, but through the frosted glass I saw movement. I knocked. Henley opened it, face unreadable. You again. I just need to review my lease, I said, to make sure I understand the terms. He stepped aside slowly, letting me in. The office smelled faintly of stale coffee and cheap air freshener. Papers were stacked everywhere, and a small camera blinked red in the corner. Go ahead, he said, motioning to a cabinet. Top drawer. I found my folder quickly, but when I opened it, something was wrong. There was a new document clipped to the back. A notice of non-payment, dated weeks ago, signed by him but supposedly delivered to me earlier that month, except it hadn't been. I'd never seen it before. Wait, I said, holding up the page. This says you gave me a notice on May 5. He shrugged. That's correct. You didn't respond. That's impossible. You never, he smiled. I slipped it under your door. Maybe you forgot. I stared at him, trying to understand how a man could lie so easily, so calmly. He reached across the desk and plucked the paper from my hand. You have until Monday. After that, the sheriff handles it. Then he turned away, pretending to sort mail, dismissing me like a nuisance. I walked out of that office feeling smaller than I had in years. He wasn't just scamming me. He was rewriting reality. By the time I reached the stairwell, I could feel the anger bubbling beneath my skin. But anger didn't help when you had no proof. And that was the worst part. I knew he was lying, but there was nothing I could do about it. That night, I called Jordan again. She let me in. Her small apartment, lit only by the flicker of her TV. He's done it before, she said, lowering her voice. A guy named Mike on the 3rd floor, same story. Paid cash. Receipts disappeared. He tried fighting it in small claims court, but Henley had fake records printed. Said Mike was lying. The judge sided with him. Did he ever get his money back? She shook her head. No, he left. Said it wasn't worth it. I rubbed my face, exhausted. So what? He just keeps doing it, and no one stops him? Jordan looked at me for a long moment. He owns the building. People come and go. Nobody fights back. That line stuck with me all night. Nobody fights back. No, I couldn't do it. I wasn't going to run, but I also couldn't confront him head on. He had the paperwork, the power, the lies already in place. I needed something bigger, something solid, something he couldn't twist. The next morning, I went to the local housing authority. The receptionist barely looked up when I explained. Do you have written proof of payment? She asked. No, I admitted. He took the receipts. Then it's his word against yours, so there's nothing I can do? She sighed. Not without documentation. File a report if you want, but these cases rarely go anywhere. I walked out, feeling the weight of those words sink into me. Rarely go anywhere. That's what helplessness sounds like. Quiet. Procedural final. That evening, when I got home, there was a bright orange paper taped to my door. Notice of eviction, 3 days to vacate. He hadn't even waited until Monday. Inside, my phone buzzed again. A text. Don't make this worse for yourself, Alex. You can still leave peacefully. It was like he was taunting me. I sank onto the couch, phone still in my hand, staring at that message. Every logical part of me wanted to scream, to fight, to storm into his office and call him a thief to his face. But logic didn't matter in his game. He had the lies. I had only the truth and no proof of it. And that's when the first thought of how to fight back started to form. Not loud, not fast, but quiet, careful, calculated. Because if Mr. Henley thought I was just another tenant who'd walk away quietly, he was about to find out how wrong he was. When someone steals from you, you expect to feel angry, but when they steal your truth, what you feel instead is panic. That's what kept me up that night, not fear of losing the apartment, but fear that I was already being erased. I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, old notes, rent dates scribbled on sticky pads, calendar reminders on my phone, anything that might help rebuild the timeline. Every entry ended the same way: rent paid, cash, receipt given. But where were the receipts now? Gone. Like they'd never existed. I checked my drawers, coat pockets, even the small tin I used for spare change. Nothing. It was as if someone had walked into my life and wiped away every trace of honesty I had. Bym. I was sitting in the glow of my laptop, reading through tenant forums, Reddit threads, legal blogs, anything that could tell me how to fight a fraudulent landlord. The advice was always the same. Get proof, document everything, don't confront him directly. But that was the problem. Proof didn't exist anymore. He'd made sure of it. I thought thought of Jordan's words from the night before. He's done it before. If that was true, maybe the evidence wasn't gone. Maybe it was just hiding buried under other people's fear. The next morning, I went door to door. I started with apartment 304. An older couple, the Petersons, who'd lived there for over a decade. They opened the door cautiously, like they already knew why I was there. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, holding up my eviction notice. "Did Mr. Henley ever accuse you of missing rent?" The husband exchanged a look with his wife. "Not us," he said slowly, "but we've seen it happen. 2 tenants last year. Both left suddenly." "Did they ever say what happened?" He sighed. "Same story. Said they'd paid. Said they had receipts. Next thing we know, the locks are changed." His wife leaned closer, lowering her voice. "He shreds things. Every Friday. Bags of papers. My husband once helped him carry one out. Heavy as bricks. He said it was old files, but I don't think it was." I thanked them and walked out, my heart pounding. He was destroying evidence, shredding documents, probably receipts, ledgers, even leases, everything that could connect him to his scam, and he'd been doing it for years. That afternoon, I went to the trash area behind the building, a fenced-off section with overflowing bins and the faint smell of bleach. I waited until the coast was clear, then climbed over the side. The first bag I opened was food waste. The second, papers, receipts, old ones, torn in half, smeared with ink. Some had apartment numbers, some had signatures, some had names I recognized, but the ink was almost gone, faded, water damaged, unreadable. Still, I stuffed them into a grocery bag. Even if it was just fragments, it was something. When I got back upstairs, I spread the scraps across my floor like puzzle pieces. One had my initials faint, but visible under the light. Another had the date. I'd moved in. My chest tightened. These weren't random papers. These were records, maybe even the ones he claimed I'd never had. I took pictures, time-stamped every photo, and backed them up in the cloud. If he was destroying his trail, I was going to rebuild it one piece at a time. But desperation makes you sloppy, and that night, I slipped up. While taking out my trash, I ran into Henley near the back stairs. He was holding a flashlight, checking locks. Our eyes met. "What are you doing back here so late?" he asked. "Just tossing garbage," I said, forcing a casual tone. His flashlight lingered on my grocery bag, the one with paper fragments sticking out. He smiled faintly. "Be careful rummaging around where you shouldn't, Alex. Not everyone appreciates it." He walked past me slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. That voice, calm, condescending, sent a chill through me. He knew. The next morning, my internet was cut off, then the heat, then the lights flickered out for hours at a time. Every day, a new inconvenience appeared. Maintenance issues, he called them. Once, I came home to find my door slightly open. Nothing missing, but my papers had been moved. He was sending a message. "I see what you're doing. Stop." I started keeping everything in my backpack: documents, photos, the torn receipts. I even began recording my conversations just in case. The paranoia was constant. Every knock, every footstep in the hallway made my heart race. I was living in my own apartment like a fugitive. A week later, I went to the local tenants' rights group downtown. It was a small office above a laundromat, walls covered in pamphlets and half-dead plants. A volunteer named Melissa listened patiently as I told her everything. When I showed her the shredded receipts, she leaned forward. "These are good," she said. "They show a pattern, but they're incomplete," I said. "He'll say they're not real." "Doesn't matter," she replied. "If other tenants can back you up, it builds credibility. Enough for a housing investigator to take interest." "An investigator?" She nodded. "If you can prove Henley's been falsifying records, it becomes criminal fraud. You just need one solid piece of evidence that connects the dots." That night, I sat on my couch staring at the fragments. Again, the word fraud echoed in my head like a siren. Fraud meant power shifting, even slightly in my direction. But one piece of evidence wasn't enough. I needed the evidence, something undeniable, something that would make him choke on his own lies. The next morning, I followed Henley. I waited in my car until he left the building. He drove to a small storage unit complex a few miles away, one I'd never seen before. He used a keycard to open a gate, parked near the back, and disappeared inside Unit 112. I waited for him to leave, then walked up to the gate. A private property sign hung across the chain. Through the narrow slats, I could see file boxes stacked high, dozens of them, labeled by month and year. He wasn't just shredding evidence, he was keeping some of it, organized, controlled, hidden. My breath caught. If those boxes contained tenant records, the real ones, then my receipts, Jordan's, the Petersons, everyone's, might still exist somewhere in there. Proof that he'd been lying, proof that he'd been stealing. But I couldn't just break in. I needed a way to expose it legally. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't fear. It was resolve. He thought he'd broken me, but he didn't know I was done being scared. I was going to bring everything he'd buried into the light, every shred, every lie, every name, even if it meant losing everything else first. The next few days passed like a silent war. Henley smiled every time he saw me, like he knew exactly how trapped I was, and yet, for the first time, I wasn't scared, because now I knew what I was looking for and I knew where he was hiding it. The storage unit, that small, off-site fortress was where all his secrets lived. But how do you get inside a place protected by locks, cameras, and a man who's been perfecting his scams for years? You don't knock directly. You find someone who already has access. I went back to Jordan's apartment. When she opened the door, I noticed she looked tired, darker circles under her eyes, hair pulled up in a quick bun. Henley again? She asked immediately. Yeah, I said. And I think I know where he's keeping the real tenant records. Her eyes widened. What do you mean, real records? I told her about the storage unit, the boxes stacked inside, the dates written on them. She listened, jaw tightening. That explains everything, she whispered. That's how he gets away with it. He probably keeps a clean version for the books, and another one he manipulates. Exactly, I said. If we can prove that, we can stop him. She looked unsure. You're talking about breaking in, Alex. I'm talking about justice, I said quietly. He's stolen from all of us. That night, Jordan and I sat in my apartment with coffee mugs and a notepad, planning our next steps. I didn't want to do anything reckless. I needed evidence, not another problem. So I decided to go through official channels first. The next morning, I went to the city housing compliance office downtown. A bored clerk at the counter listened half-heartedly as I explained the situation. Do you have proof of fraudulent activity? She asked flatly. I handed her printed photos of the shredded receipts, the eviction notice, the box labels. She flipped through them, unimpressed. Looks circumstantial. The first part of the trap was simple: build credibility. I filed a formal complaint with the housing department, then a police report with the financial crimes division. But I knew bureaucracy would take weeks, maybe months. Henley wouldn't wait that long. So I started working on the second part, the one he wouldn't see coming. I spent the next few days reaching out to every tenant who'd ever mentioned rent issues. Jordan helped me collect names and contacts from the building's old mail logs and group chats. By day 3, I had a list of 12 tenants, current and former, and when I called each one, almost every single person said the same thing. He said I missed rent I already paid. He kept my deposit. He threatened eviction. Some of them cried. Some of them cursed. All of them remembered. And every story was identical. Same pattern. Same excuses. Same result. Henley wasn't just greedy, he was methodical. He targeted people who paid in cash, avoided paper trails, and trusted his handwritten receipts. He'd been rehearsing this scam for years, perfecting it like an artist. The more I uncovered, the more organized my plan became. I wasn't just collecting stories, I was collecting proof of a pattern. Each tenant agreed to write a statement. A few still had screenshots of text messages from him, reminding you of your late payment, or this is your final notice. One had even filmed an argument on her phone. When she sent it to me, my jaw dropped. In the video, Henley's voice was clear as day. You can't prove anything without receipts, he sneered. And we both know where those went. He laughed, like it was a game. That clip alone could sink him. But I wanted more than legal victory. I wanted exposure. So I contacted a local investigative journalist, Dana Ruiz, who wrote for the Tribune Metro Watch. She'd covered corruption before. When I told her about Henley, she said, meet me tomorrow. Bring everything you've got. We met at a cafe downtown. She wore a gray coat, hair pulled back, recorder on the table. As I laid out the receipts, the photos, and the witness statements, her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. You're telling me, she said slowly, this man has been falsifying rent records, destroying evidence, and extorting tenants for years? Yes, I said, and he's still doing it. She leaned forward. If we can verify this, it's going to blow up. But we need him to incriminate himself. On record. I smiled faintly. I've been planning for that. The next phase of the trap required precision. I set up a small voice recorder inside my living room tucked behind a stack of books near the couch. Jordan had one too, just in case. Then I texted Henley. Hi, about the rent issue. I found something. Can we talk tomorrow? I think there's been a misunderstanding. It didn't take long for him to reply. Good. I'm glad you've come to your senses. 9 a.m. That was the moment my stomach twisted, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The hunter thought the prey was surrendering. He had no idea he was walking straight into his own snare. That night, I reviewed the plan one last time. The journalist's contact in the police department was standing by. The tenants were ready to confirm everything if needed, and my recorder was hidden perfectly. The next morning, I sat on my couch, pretending to sip coffee, when Henley knocked. He walked in like he owned the place, all polished confidence and fake courtesy. So, he said, glancing around, have you decided how you want to handle this? I think there's been a mistake, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Maybe a mix-up with the records. He smirked. Alex, you seem like a smart guy. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I tilted my head. Harder? He sat down, crossing his legs. I'm giving you a chance to walk away quietly. Pay the 6 months, and I'll make sure this doesn't affect your rental history. My jaw tightened. And what happens if I don't? He smiled coldly. Then you'll be out by Friday. For the next 10 minutes, I played dumb asking questions, acting confused. Every word was being recorded. Then, finally, I asked the question I needed on tape. Why did the receipts disappear, Mr. Henley? You said you had copies. He chuckled. Copies? Please, you think I keep those? Those things are long gone. And what about all the other tenants? I pressed. They can't all be lying. He leaned back, smirking. Tenants talk. Tenants complain. But at the end of the day, the landlord's word stands. It always has. Click. Got it. When he left, I sent the audio file to Dana immediately. 2 hours later, she replied with 3 words. This is gold. That night, Jordan came over, and we sat by the window, silent but smiling. We didn't celebrate yet, not until the story was out, not until the city heard the truth. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Henley knocked on my door. Control. I wasn't just surviving his game anymore. I was winning it, and the best part? He still didn't know the world was about to hear everything. The day the story broke, the city woke up differently. It was early morning when my phone buzzed non-stop notifications, texts, emails. I rubbed my eyes, half asleep, before I saw it. Local landlord under investigation for fraud. Tenants claim years of manipulation and threats. Tribune Metro Watch. By Dana Rusand. Right under the headline was his face, Henley, smiling in a photo he'd probably given the paper himself years ago, back when he won some community builder award. Now that same face was splashed across every newsfeed, every Facebook share, every neighborhood forum. And the comments. They were brutal. That guy scammed my aunt too. I knew something was off with him. Finally someone stood up to this creep. It was like striking a match in a room soaked with gasoline. By noon, half the tenants had seen it. By evening, there were reporters outside the building, and by the next morning Henley showed up. I heard him before I saw him. His voice echoed through the hallway like a siren, furious and sharp. Where's he? I stepped out of my apartment, calm on the outside, but my pulse drummed in my ears. He was standing in the lobby, face red, tie loose, holding his phone like it had betrayed him. Alex, he hissed, marching toward me. What the hell did you do? I stayed quiet. The cameras from across the street were already watching through the glass door. You think this is a joke? He spat. You've ruined my name. I met his glare. No, you ruined your name a long time ago. I just told the truth. He laughed, that mocking, dismissive laugh he'd used on every tenant who ever questioned him. Truth? He sneered. You broke into my storage. You trespassed. You stole files that show you've been falsifying rent for years. I interrupted, my voice steady. And guess what? They're in police custody now. That stopped him cold for half a second. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think anyone will believe you? You're just some broke tenant. I've been in this business 30 years. Exactly, I said quietly. 30 years of silence. That's over now. A small crowd was gathering near the mailboxes. Tenants, curious neighbors, even one of the reporters. Henley noticed too. His expression hardened. Get back to your apartments, he barked at them. This is a private conversation. No one moved. Instead, a woman stepped forward, Mrs. Hernandez from DeB. She'd been one of his victims too, an elderly widow he once tried to evict over a missing deposit. Private? She said loudly. You took my money and called me a liar. Henley froze. Then another voice. You told me I was behind on rent when I wasn't. Then another. You threatened me in front of my kids. And then it happened. The whole lobby erupted. Every voice that had stayed quiet out of fear, shame, or exhaustion, now spilling out all at once. Henley looked around, cornered not by walls, but by truth. He tried to shout over them, but the words died in his throat. Then Dana arrived. She pushed through the doorway, microphone in hand, camera trailing behind her. Mr. Henley, she said clearly. Dana Ruiz with Tribune Metro Watch. Would you like to comment on the ongoing fraud investigation? He spun toward her, flustered. This is harassment. I haven't done anything wrong. She didn't blink. Then why are your tenants providing identical statements about falsified ledgers, missing receipts, and threats of eviction? His face twisted. Those people are lying. Are they? She pressed. Because we have a recording of you admitting you destroyed receipts. The color drained from his face. I didn't move. I just watched the same way he once watched me crumble in that office, when he thought he held all the power. Now, it was his turn. The footage went viral within hours. By evening, local news anchors were replaying his meltdown in the lobby, looping that one perfect moment. You think I keep those? Those things are long gone. The sentence that buried him. The police released a statement later that night, an official investigation into multiple counts of fraud and evidence tampering. Tenants were lining up to testify. Past victims came forward from other buildings he owned. Even his business partners began distancing themselves publicly. Henley's empire, the one built on fear and fake smiles, started crumbling piece by piece. But victory didn't feel like celebration yet. It felt heavy every day after the confrontation. I'd walk past the lobby and see reporters outside, tenants whispering, lawyers showing up with files. It was like watching the slow collapse of a world that had stood for too long. and somewhere deep down, I wondered how many others were still out there, living under men like him, too scared to speak. Jordan came over one night, watching me stare out the window as another news van parked outside. "You did it," she said softly. I shook my head. "We did it, all of us," she smiled faintly. "You know, I don't think he ever believed you'd fight back." "Good," I said. "That's what made the trap work." 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Ramos, the officer leading the investigation. "We've reviewed the materials," he said. "Everything checks out. We've issued a warrant for Henley's arrest. He'll be taken in tomorrow morning." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. It didn't feel real, but when I hung up, I realized the fear that had lived in my chest for weeks was finally gone. I stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the cold evening air. Below, the building lights flickered softly for the first time. It didn't feel like a cage. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, I heard sirens. I walked down to the lobby quietly. Henley stood there, flanked by 2 officers, wrists bound. His eyes found mine furious, bewildered, defeated. He tried to speak, but I just stared back, calm and silent. As they let him out, the tenants gathered again. No one cheered. No one clapped. They just watched, because sometimes justice isn't loud, sometimes it's just still. The door closed behind him, and for the first time since all of it began, I exhaled fully. He was gone, and the building finally felt alive again. Outside, Dana waited by her car, camera in hand. She caught my eye and smiled. "Congratulations," she said. "You just helped take down one of the biggest rental scams this city's seen in years." I nodded. "Thanks for believing me." She shook her head. "You didn't need belief. You had proof." That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by papers and quiet. I opened my drawer and pulled out one of the old rent receipts, the one that started it all. At the bottom, in his neat handwriting, it said, "Paid in full." For a long time, I just stared at those 3 words, because finally, truly, completely, they were true. Justice, I learned, doesn't happen all at once. It comes in layers, slow, deliberate, like the turning of a clock that's been broken for years. After Henley's arrest, the city buzzed with headlines. For weeks, the story dominated local news. Reporters dug deeper. Tenants came forward. Former employees spoke anonymously about destroyed ledgers, double rent collection, and off-the-books cash deals. It wasn't just my building anymore. It was half the city's rental network under scrutiny, and every new report was like another nail in the coffin of his empire. The trial began. 3 months later, the courthouse was packed. Tenants, lawyers, journalists, and people who'd never even met him, but had followed the story like it was a movie. Henley walked in wearing the same suit I'd seen him wear in that first meeting, the one where he accused me of owing rent, except now it looked too big on him. He'd lost weight, color, and whatever mask of superiority he once wore. He didn't look like a landlord. He looked like a man cornered by his own reflection. When the prosecution played the recordings, his voice sneering about destroyed receipts, his threats, the forged documents, I didn't watch him. I watched the jury. Their expressions hardened with each word, because fraud is one thing, but the cruelty of pretending it's business as usual, that's what broke them. Then came the testimonies, one by one. Tenants took the stand. An old woman who'd been evicted over $200 that she had paid in full, a young mother who had to sleep in her car for weeks after he lost her lease renewal, even a maintenance worker who admitted Henley told him to get rid of the boxes in storage before the inspection. That was the moment the courtroom shifted. The lie that had held all of us hostage finally fell apart in the open. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand. The clerk swore me in, and for a second, everything went silent, except my own heartbeat. I told them about the day it started, the fake debt, the missing receipts, the manipulation, the fear, and then I told them about the proof, how I found the files, the hidden ledger, and the witnesses who'd seen everything. When I finished, I looked at Henley. He was staring at the floor, his hands clasped tightly together. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing, because justice wasn't about rage anymore. It was about release. 2 days later, the jury came back, guilty, on all counts: fraud, evidence tampering, intimidation, and falsification of records. The judge's voice carried through the room like thunder. "Mr. Henley," she said, "you used power not to serve, but to control. You exploited the trust of the people you were supposed to protect. The court sentences you to 7 years in prison, restitution to your tenants, and permanent revocation of your property licenses." He didn't react. He just sat there motionless as the officers stood beside him. When they let him out, he turned slightly, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for a way back into a life that no longer existed. But no one looked back at him. Afterward, tenants gathered outside the courthouse. Some cried, some laughed, some just stood quietly, staring up at the gray building as if it were finally, mercifully, letting go of its ghosts. Dana approached me with her recorder off. "For once, you did it," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "No, we did." She tilted her head. "You know this story's bigger than rent, right?" "I know," I said. "It's about the kind of power people think they'll never lose until the truth shows up with receipts." She chuckled. "Good headline." Over the next few weeks, restitution payments started arriving. Every tenant who'd been scammed got their money back piece by piece. Some moved out, some stayed, building new lives lives without fear, and the building itself, once a monument to manipulation, started to feel different, lighter. The walls didn't echo with anxiety anymore, even the air felt freer somehow. One evening, I returned from work and found a small envelope under my door. Inside was a single folded note. It read, "I should have treated people better. I was greedy, not just for money, but for control. You were right. Truth wins. I hope you use yours better than I did." H stared at it for a long time, not in forgiveness but in understanding. Some people build their cages with lies, others break theirs with courage, and I realized which one I had become. That night, I placed the note next to the last receipt he ever wrote me, the one that said paid in full, and for the first time, I truly felt what those words meant, because this time, the payment wasn't just money. It was justice. Some endings don't come with applause, they arrive quietly like dawn after a long night. After Henley's sentencing, the noise faded fast. Reporters moved on to other scandals, other villains. The tenants who once stood shoulder to shoulder in anger began to return to their lives, and the building, once filled with whispers and dread, became just another address again. For the first time in months, I could sleep without expecting a knock at the door. No threats, no letters, no games, just stillness. And in that stillness, I started to understand something I hadn't before, that survival and justice aren't the same thing. Survival keeps you breathing, justice lets you live. I'd always thought revenge would feel satisfying, loud, burning, like a storm, but it did end. Single quotes. It felt quiet, like the sound of rain after fire, because in the end, it wasn't about beating Henley. It was about beating the version of myself who used to accept being powerless. I still remember the first time I ever signed that lease. Years ago, I was young, idealistic, trusting, the kind of person who believed systems worked because people wanted them to. I didn't know then that some systems exist because people know how to twist them. Henley was a master of that. He didn't just take money, he took trust. He made good people feel small, and that's what I think about most now, how easy it is for fear to turn silence into obedience. That's the real crime, not just what he did, but what we all let happen while thinking, it's not my fight. A few weeks after the trial, I was invited to speak at a tenant rights forum downtown. I didn't want to at first. Public speaking wasn't me. I'd spent half my life avoiding attention, but something about it felt right when I stepped on that small stage. Looking out at rows of faces, some young, some tired, some scared, I saw versions of myself in all of them. I told them the truth, that justice isn't about courts or lawyers. It starts the moment you stop doubting your own experience. Document everything, I said. Keep your receipts, not just the paper ones but the emotional ones too. Every time someone tries to make you feel small, remember it. One day, that'll be your proof. They clapped softly, not the kind of applause that feeds ego, the kind that acknowledges pain shared and understood. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was shaking. She said, "I thought I was crazy. My landlord does the same things." I handed her my card, just a name, a number, and one line beneath it: "The truth is stronger than fear." She smiled through tears, and I realized that was worth more than any courtroom victory. One evening, months later, I found myself walking past the courthouse again. It was empty. Quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel eerie but now just felt peaceful. I stood there for a while, watching the flag flutter against the darkening sky. That's when it hit me how much lighter life feels when you stop carrying other people's lies. Henley used to say, business is about control, but he was wrong. It's about accountability, because when power doesn't answer to truth, it becomes poison. And greed. Greed is just fear in disguise. Fear of not having enough, not being enough. But when you build your life around fear, it doesn't matter how much you own, it will own you. I still live in the same apartment. Some people ask why I didn't move. Maybe it's because I needed to prove to myself that the place wasn't cursed, it was just wounded. And healing isn't running away from the place you were hurt, it's standing in it. And knowing it can't touch you anymore. The new Landlord, a nonprofit group that took over Henley's property, stopped by last week. They've started repainting the hallways, fixing old pipes, planting flowers in the courtyard. Small things, maybe, but every brush stroke, every nail, every petal feels like restoration. The building isn't haunted anymore. It's finally home. Sometimes, at night, I still pull out that box of receipts, the ones that almost got destroyed. They're yellowed now, edges curled, but I keep them as reminders, not of the debt, of the lesson, because every one of those papers says the same 3 words, paid in full. And that's what truth does, it collects what the world owes you, piece by piece, until one day you realize you're whole again. The other day, I got a letter. It was from the Department of Housing. They wanted to use my case in their new training program for investigators. Your documentation, it read, set the benchmark for how tenant evidence can bring systemic reform. I laughed when I read that, not because it was funny, but because I remembered how terrified I'd been, sitting at my kitchen table months ago, wondering if anyone would ever listen. Now, they were learning from it. That's the thing about truth. When it finally lands, it doesn't just fix one story. It changes the rules for everyone who comes after. I don't think about Henley much anymore. He's somewhere far from here behind bars, maybe still convincing himself he was misunderstood. But that's not my story to carry anymore. Mine is simpler now. I wake up, make coffee, open the blinds, and let the morning light in. I work, I write, I live, and every once in a while, when I walk through the lobby, I catch the reflection of myself in the glass, calm, grounded, unafraid, not a victim, not a survivor, just a man who learned that respect, the kind you give yourself, is the only rent life ever really asks you to pay, and I've paid it in full.